Hey there, welcome to the Unleash Your Greatness Within podcast. In today's message, I just want to quickly share with you a concept on resilience, that happy people have resilient mindsets. You see, the ultimate test of someone who has a resilient mindset is that they have the ability to find meaning in their suffering, to find meaning in their disappointment, to find meaning in even their heartbreak or a failure that, they had. You know what? It's that ability to get knocked down and get back up. People with a resilient mindset, their attitude, their life experience isn't determined ultimately by the events of their lives. No, it is shaped by the way they think. And so I'm encouraging you to become a master interpreter. Steve Jobs of Apple Computers was a master interpreter. They had something called the reality distortion field. When he believed something was possible, even when nobody else did, when he could see something that no one else could see. And you know what? He and his company had an ability to bounce back in the face of dark days and frustrating moments and bad decisions. But you know what? They got through those times because as a company, they had a resilient mindset. And Steve Jobs was at the helm of that. But let me just share a couple thoughts. If you are what you do, when you don't, you aren't. If you allow, in other words, if you allow the events of your life to dictate your happiness, your well-being, then you won't be happy consistently. Right? Instead, you want to be on an even keel, having those peaks and those valleys, those ups and downs, but not being defined by them. These are patterns of people who have resilient mindsets. How about this? Here's another example that people that have resilient mindsets are able to notice the blessings in disguise. Think about people in your world that that just no matter what happens to them, whatever life throws at them, they have a positive perspective, a way of looking at it. Well, I suggest to you that people with a resilient mindset have that ability to find in any moment, good or bad or ugly, the blessings in disguise. And because of that, they tend to be happier people. All right? Life doesn't dictate their happiness. Their mindset, their way of looking at the world dictate their happiness. So to illustrate this, I have a story I want to share with you. I don't know if you recognize the name Corrie ten Boom. She wrote the book, The Hiding Place. Well, years ago, during World War II, when the Nazi tyranny was taking over many of those European countries, she found it to be her duty, being a Christian, to harbor the Jews in her home and in the apartment next to her home. When she and her family, particularly her and her sister Betsy, so Corrie and Betsy, were discovered, they were taken to concentration camps. They got to the concentration camp. They put them in the barracks with over 100 other women. She says in the book that it was so crowded in there, you could barely have any room to move around. And that first night when she laid down on those bunk beds that were really tight, right? Bunk beds stacked on top of each other. There was straw on the bunk bed. She noticed while she laid there within the first hour of laying there to go to sleep for the night that something bit her leg. To illustrate this story, I'll just read from what she wrote in the book, The Hiding Place. Suddenly, Corrie started up, striking her head on the cross slats above of the bunk beds. Something had bitten her leg. "Fleas!" she cried. "Betsy," she told her sister, that was her sister's name. "Betsy, the place is swarming with them." Descending from the platform and edging down a narrow aisle, they made it to a light at the end of the barracks. "Here and there's another one," Corrie wailed. "Betsy, how can we live in such a place?" When suddenly she looked over at Betsy, and Betsy had her head down. She knew that Betsy was praying. Corrie checked to make sure there were no guards nearby. Then they drew from a pouch a small Bible she had managed to smuggle into the concentration camp. It was 1 Thessalonians, Betsy said. Finding the passage in the feeble light? Here it is. And this is what she told Corey. And she encouraged Corey, her sister, to remember this. In 1 Thessalonians, it says, "Seek to do good, one to another and all. Rejoice always. Pray consistently. Give thanks in all circumstance." Betsy said, "That's it. That's the answer. Give thanks in every circumstance." That's what we can do. We can start right now. Well, that didn't make Corey that much happier, right? She was frustrated that she was in the barracks with a bunch of fleas. But her sister Betsy, having a little bit more faith, said to her, "Think about this. Think of the blessings that are here." She says, "Imagine this. We sisters are together. Isn't that great?" She then went on to say, "And look what we're holding in our hands, these little Bibles that we were able to smuggle in. And you know what? We're able to have small study groups, Bible study groups with the ladies in the barracks for those that were interested in it." Wow, she said. But Corey still wasn't convinced. But Betsy doubled down. She said in a prayer, Thank you for the fleas." That was too much for Corey. She cut into her sister, "Betsy, there's no way even God can make me grateful for a flea." And as I was studying this and thinking about doing this podcast, I don't know how it happens, algorithms and so forth. I happened to get on YouTube, Johnny Carson had Ellen DeGeneres on for her first stand-up comedy routine. And guess what let me just show here. I thought this was funny.
I'm always thinking about these things because to me life is very precious. It's very special. We're here for such a short time that everything on this earth should have a reason, should have a beneficial purpose. And I feel like everything does, except for fleas. Fleas do nothing at all beneficial. I always thought at times like this when we can't figure it out for ourselves, wouldn't it be great if we could just pick up the phone and call up God and ask him these things?
Anyway, let's get back to the real story, which is that eventually Corey discovered that Betsy was right, to be thankful in all circumstances. And this is how it came about. One evening, when Corey arrived at the barracks, Betsy's eyes were twinkling. "You're looking extraordinarily pleased with yourself," Corey said. Betsy said, "We've never understood why we had so much freedom here in the barracks," referring to the part of the barracks where sleeping platforms were. "Well, I found out why. This afternoon, there was confusion in my knitting group about sock sizes. So we asked a supervisor to come in and settle it, but she wouldn't. She wouldn't step through the door, and neither would the guards. And you know why? Do you know why, Corey?" Betsy said, in all her triumph, she said, "Because of the fleas." That's what she said. This place is crawling with fleas, and the guards and the supervisors don't want to come in to this area, which gave them freedom. Right? It gave them peace from the guards. It gave them the ability to study the Bible and have, group discussions and so forth that lifted the spirits of themselves and the people that were in the concentration camp. So finally, Corey realized that there were many blessings in disguise. That is a resilient mindset. So even in your suffering, if you can find meaning in your circumstance, the blessings in disguise, you will start to develop the discipline, the mindset, the habit, the way of thinking, the way of interpreting your world in such a way that you will begin to have a more resilient mindset. So that's my advice to you. Let me just be really quick. Number one, understand what Maxwell Maltz once said when he wrote his book, Psycho-Cybernetics. He said this: when you fail at something, that does not mean you are a failure. When you make a mistake, that does not mean that you are a mistake. That just means in that moment, you didn't do your best and you had a mistake. And the reality is, life is not always fair. Life doesn't always work out the way that we hoped, imagined, or planned. And so we have to be able, in those hard moments, to disassociate, displace, and dispute, right? And those don't have to be in those order, but you want to, sometimes when it's so painful, you got to separate yourself. You got to disassociate. Then you got to dispute the reality of it. And in terms of how you communicate, well, this normally isn't like me, or this mistake, I'm not going to take it personal, or I'm not going to agree what you say that's negative, right? Those kinds of conversations that we have internally. Stand up to those negative voices and then displace. Figure out a new path forward is my advice to you. Right? So first of all, when you're going through a struggle, understand it does not reflect your individual worth. You have innate greatness, and it's a matter of unleashing it. The other thing that you can do is hang around and associate with people who are positive, people that lift you. Another thing that you can do is put yourself in a position of doing hard things, doing things that are beyond your current skill level, and then realizing you're much more capable than you think you are. Oftentimes as human beings, we don't take action because we're afraid of what someone will think. We're afraid of failing, so we don't take any action at all. But how many times in your life have you taken action on something only to discover that you're more capable than you thought you were? Yeah, we amaze ourselves all the time, but you'll never know that unless you put yourself out there. So one way to help with that is get around people that have shared vision and that are positive and that lift you and that believe in you and so forth. It doesn't mean that they're optimistic all the time. Sometimes the people you love are real with you, but that they have a genuine interest in helping you succeed. That's what you want to look for. And then the next thing you could do is you can read a book. There are books out there of people who have gone from tragedy to tragedy and eventually found triumph. If you read those books, the words of other people who have gone through it, how did they view the world? What was it that was different about them that they were able to move beyond this point in their life? How did they look at the world and interpret it? Maybe you can pick up a belief that you can adopt. Be a seeker. Right? Seek for the good. Look for the good. And as you get in the habit of doing that, you will, and doing difficult things and rising above, right, your capacity and stretching your own capacity outside your comfort zone and realizing you're more capable than you thought you were, never taking the failure or the disappointment personally. As you get in the habit of doing that, you will strengthen that resilient mindset. And if you start to think like Corrie ten Boom did and Betsy ten Boom, I tell you what, you naturally will be a happier person. You're not, as Zig Ziglar would say, a leaf in the windstorm, right? You are consistent. I get that human beings aren't always consistent. We do have our ups and our downs, but thinking has a lot to do with, in fact, the truth is everything begins and ends with the quality of our thoughts. So I encourage you to take these little nuggets, apply them to your life, realize that your happiness is governed by the quality of your thinking. What are you looking for? When I worked with Tony Robbins years ago, over 20 years ago, he would always say that high achievers see things as they are, but they see it a little bit better than it is, right? Happy people see things as they are, but they see it a little bit better than it is. However, unsuccessful people, unhappy people happen to see things as they are, but they see it a little worse than it is. Does that make sense to you? I hope that's a good reminder for you as you're on your path of achieving your goals and your dreams. Life isn't always fair, but you can act as if it is. Act as if. Act as if you are optimistic. Act as if, what would you do in this circumstance if you were confident in yourself, if you were optimistic? And I guarantee you, if you start going down those pathways in terms of your thinking, you will find more happiness, right? Happy people have resilient mindsets. And I've just explained what a resilient mindset looks like. The ability to get knocked down, not because you choose to, but life sometimes knocks you down, but you have the ability to get back up and keep moving forward on your purpose. All right? I wish you the very best. I hope this was helpful to to you. Go read the book, The Hiding Place, and I wish you the very best. Now go unleash your greatness within. Podcast listeners, thanks for listening. You've taken time out of your schedule, and I really appreciate it. Now do me a favor. If you like what you heard, star it. Thanks. Now go unleash your greatness within.